Have you ever wanted to start a cool new mage build, but just didn't have any idea where to get those pesky spells without spending a fortune at merchants that may or may not even have the spells you're looking for, or just not known which merchant to go to? Well, today we will be going through every spell you can get, many of them for free, and some of them without needing to do a single quest. Well, okay, you'll need to do the intro quest unless you're using alternate start, but don't worry about that. And yes, we will be including Anniversary Edition content too. So if you're looking for any of that, this is the place to be. Now, for each spell, I will talk about each location they can be obtained at and what quests have them as rewards and such. But the merchants that sell them will be listed on screen like this to avoid me having to say the same names over and over again. Also, if a merchant doesn't sell what they are supposed to, you are probably not the correct skill level. Usually, you have to be at least 10 levels away from the corresponding perk. For example, you need to be at least level 40 in Destruction to buy Adept Destruction spells. The Adept Destruction perk is unlocked at level 50. Being at this level also makes many of these spells available as random loot, so you might just get lucky. Oh, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Now, going in order of the skill trees, we have Illusion first. Going in alphabetical order, our first spell is Call to Arms. This spell can only be acquired after completing the Master Illusion quest received from Drevis Nolarian after getting to 90 Illusion. Once the quest is complete, it can be purchased from him. I'd say how much it's for, but really it depends on your speech perks and levels and all that, so I won't really be talking about prices in this video. Next up is the Cam spell, which can only be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next up, we have the Clairvoyance spell, which can be found in Embershard Mine. It's one of the first locations you are likely to ever visit, and can be found here. The tome will be on a table in the locked room just after lowering the drawbridge. Next, we have Courage, which can be found in Treva's Watch, which is here on the map. Remember that one, we'll be back here later. The tome is found near an enchantment table atop the fort's tower. Next is the spell Fear, which can only be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next, we have our first Creation Club spell, Fenrick's Welcome, but I will also throw in Orum's Aquatic Escape here, as it is also an illusion spell found in the same chest. These spells, along with a bunch of others we'll get to in their own categories, can be found here in Hobbs Fall Cave. Just run through the cave, it's very linear, and it's in this chest. Trust me, you'll be seeing a lot of this one. Next up, we have Frenzy. This spell can only be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next, we have Frenzy Rune. This spell can only be acquired after completing From the Ashes quest in the Dragonborn DLC. All this really involves is walking out of Tel Mithryn and killing an Ash Guardian. It is then sold by Talbas. Next up is the Fury spell, which, unless you start as a High Elf who have access to the spell automatically, can only be purchased from the merchants on screen. Our next two spells are Harmony and Hysteria, and much like our first entry, are only available after the Master Illusion quest. Next, we have Invisibility, which can be bought from, of course, Drevis, but remember this is an expert spell, so you'll need to be at least 65 in Illusion. And now our final Master Illusion spell, Mayhem. Exactly the same as the others. Do the quest, buy the spell, you get it. Next up, we have Muffle, which can only be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Pacify, which can only be purchased from our friend Drevis. Up next is Rally, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. And penultimately, for the Illusion School, we have Rout, which is an expert spell I literally forgot existed, but once again can be purchased from Drevis. And finally, for Illusion, we have Vision of the 10th Eye. I don't know why you'd want this, but it's just given to you by Drevis for the Master Illusion quest. Moving on to the Conjuration skill tree, there are actually quite a few of these which can be created at the Atronach Forge found down in the midden. So, in addition to the merchants, there shall be a second list on screen for the ingredients needed if applicable. Up first is Banish Daedra, which can be found in the locked chest at the end of Broken or Grotto. The key for this chest can be looted from Hargar, who will be close by. Next up, another Creation Club edition, Banish Undead. This one can only be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next, we have Bound Battleaxe. This spell can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next up is Bound Bow. This spell can be found in Fort Amol, simply by running into the prison, heading left, and you will see the book lying in a bucket. Next, we have Bound Dagger. This can once again be purchased from Telvas after the From the Ashes quest. Another Anniversary Edition item now with Bound Quiver, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Now we have Bound Sword, which takes us back to Treva's Watch. Early on, if you've entered through the secret passage, you will pass through an area with bear traps, and just beyond this is a room where a bandit chief will spawn. Inside, on top of a table, will be the tome. Next up, we have Command Daedra, which can be purchased from this merchant on screen. Next, from Anniversary Edition, we have Conjure Ancient Deathpriest, which can be purchased from this merchant on screen. Next up is Conjure Ash Guardian, which will be given to you after completion of the From the Ashes quest we discussed earlier. Next, we have Conjure Ash Spawn, which is once again purchasable from Telvas, but this time you need to go complete the Telvanni research quest with Nell. It's pretty simple though, you just need to bring him some ash from one of the ash spawn. Next up, from Anniversary Edition, we have Conjure Alyied Lich. This one can only be made at the Atronach Forge after the quest The Consequences, which is part of the Cause questline. And not staying away from the Anniversary Edition content, we have Conjure Bone Colossus, which can be purchased from the merchant shown on screen. Now we have Conjure Boneman, which is a slight problem because it's in the Soul Cairn. And fun fact about the Soul Cairn, it doesn't have a map. So what you're seeing on screen right now is the best you're getting. And I don't even know what that is yet because I haven't started recording the footage yet. But back to something a little easier to find, we have from Anniversary Edition. Actually, I'm getting a little tired of that. I'll just put a little AA in the corner from now on. Anyway, we have Conjure Cursed Spectre, which can be purchased from the merchant shown on screen. Next up, we have the Conjure Dark Seducer Archer and Warrior spells. Both spells can be obtained by looting Thoron at the end of the Saints and Seducers questline. Next, we have Conjure Dremora Lord, which can be purchased from this merchant on screen. Next is Conjure Familiar, which is a spell that Bretons will start with, but for everyone else, it can be purchased at the vendors on screen. Next is Conjure Flame Atronach, which can be found in Corvindrude, which is here. You probably recognize this place as where you go in the Civil War to get the Jagged Crown. The spell tome will be found in a bowl that you'll probably need to knock down to access. Next up, we have the Conjure Foul Zombies spell. This can be found here on the map or bought from any of the merchants on screen after the completion of the Rising Dead quest. Next, we have Conjure Frost Atronach. This can be either purchased from one of the merchants on screen or created at the Atronach Forge. The Conjure Golden Saint Archer and Warrior spells are obtained in the same way as the Dark Seducers, either from Thoron or at the Atronach Forge. The Conjure Haunting Spirit spell can be found in Yngvild, which can be found here on the map. This tome will be in the bedroom through an iron door at the end of the dungeon. The spell Conjure Malignant Zombie can be purchased only after the completion of the Conjuration Master quest and the Rising Dead quest. But if you don't want to do any of that, you can also find it here on the map. Next up is Conjure Mistman, and just like the Bone Man, it's in the Soul Cairn, so just go where I am on screen because there's no map. The spell Conjure Putrid Zombie can be purchased after completion of the Rising Dead quest, or alternatively, can be found here. Next, we have Conjure Seeker, which is an interesting one because I can't necessarily give you an exact location. You can find the spell in Apocrypha, but only if your conjuration is above 40. Next, we have a collection of spells, the Summon Skeleton Marksman, Champion, Minion, and Warlock spells, each of which can be purchased from the merchant on screen. The Minion spell, however, can also be found here. Next up, we have Conjure Stadia. This spell can be created at the Atronach Forge with the ingredients listed on screen. Next up, we have Conjure Storm Atronach. This spell can be acquired from either the merchant on screen or the Atronach Forge recipe on screen. The Conjure Tomb Guardian spell can be purchased from the merchant shown on screen. The Conjure Undying Ghost spell can be found on a rock next to the Ritual Stone here. And it's Conjure Wrathman time. We're back in the Soul Cairn. You know the drill, it's here. Next, we have Conjure Zombie, which can be found here or purchased from the merchant on screen if the Rising Dead quest has been completed. Next, we have Dead Thrall, which means we're finally out of the Conjure Blank spells, which is great because, my god, that took forever. Anyway, Dead Thrall, of course, can be purchased after the completion of the Master Conjuration quest. Next, we have Dread Zombie, which can be purchased from the merchant on screen. The Expel Daedra spell can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next up, we have Flame Thrall, which, of course, can be purchased after completing the Conjuration Master quest. However, rather surprisingly, you can also find this spell tome in Apocrypha at the end of the Black Book Sallow Regent. Well, it's not that surprising lore-wise, but it is gameplay-wise. Next up, we have Flaming Familiar, which can be obtained as a reward for the quest A Scroll for Anska, which can be started by heading to Highgate Ruins and talking to Anska. Next, we have Frost Thrall, which, of course, can only be purchased after the completion of the Conjuration Master quest. Next, we have Necromancer's Ritual, which can be found next to the boss enemy in Wolfskull Cave. And finally, we are back at Hobbs Fall Cave. Lots more to come from here, but just one for the Conjuration School. It is Pride of Herstag. You know the drill, just follow the cave until the room with the iron bars and the ancient chest. Next, we have Ray's Zombie, which can be found at Fort Snowhawk, Haldios Cairn, and the Felglow Keep dungeons. Next up, we have Reanimate Corpse. This can be found at the boss enemy at the end of Ironbind Barrow. The spell Revenant can be purchased from the merchant shown on screen. The spell Soul Split can be found on the enchanting table in Ilinalta's Deep. Soul Trap can be purchased from the merchant shown on screen or created at the Atronach Forge with the ingredients listed. Next, we have Storm Thrall, and say it with me now, it can only be purchased after the completion of the Conjuration Master quest. Next up is Summon Arniel's Shade, which is given to the player upon completion of the Arniel's Endeavor quest. Next up is Summon Arvak, which is unfortunately once again in the Soul Cairn. You talk to this guy near the start, and then you go to this place to get Arvak's skull, and then you take it back to the guy. Again, there's no map, so that's the best you're getting. Next is Summon Daedric Horse, which can be found in the Deadlands if you follow the Cause questline. And finally, for Conjuration, we have the Summon Unbound Dremora spell, which is given to the player as a part of the Conjuration Master quest. And now we move on to Destruction. Up first is Arniel's Convection, which is given to the player during the Arniel's Endeavor questline. Next, we have Blizzard, which can be purchased after completing the Master Destruction quest. Next up is Chain Lightning, which can be purchased at the merchants on screen. And now we are back with Hobbs Fall Cave for Choking Grasp, Elemental Blast, Elemental Bolt, Elemental Burst, Elemental Flare, Hangman's Noose, Mara's Wrath, Strangulation, Touch of Death, Unbounded Flames, Unbounded Freezing, and Unbounded Storms. Same deal as before, just run through the cave and get the chest. Easy peasy. You can buy most of these from all the major magical merchants too, but there's just no reason to ever do that. Next is Fire Rune, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Firestorm, which is the reward the player receives upon completion of the Master Destruction quest. Next up is Fireball, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next we have Firebolt, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Flame Cloak, which can be found near Dawnstar, just here on the map. Next is Flames, which of course every character starts with. Freeze and Ignite are spells that are only available whilst wearing the appropriate rings of Azadal found in the Unearthed questline on Saltstein. Next, we have Frost Cloak, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Up next is Frost Rune, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next, we have Frostbite, which can be found in Labyrinthian, Mazalt, and Serpent's Bluff runes. The Ice Spike spell can be found fairly deep within Raven Rock Mine, but luckily is quite hard to miss. It can also, of course, be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next up is Ice Storm, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next we have Icy Spear, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is a Lightning Bolt, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Lightning Cloak, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Lightning Storm, which can only be purchased after the completion of the Master Destruction quest. Next, we have Sparks, which all Dark Elves will start with. It can also be found in Felglow Keep, but more importantly, it can, of course, be found in the very first quest inside the locked cage with the dead mage. Next is Thunderbolt, which can be taught to Pikachu, purchased from the merchants on screen. Next, we have Vampiric Drain, which is automatically given to the player upon becoming a vampire. Next, we have the wall spells, being Wall of Flames, Frost, and Storms, all of which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. And finally, for destruction is Whirlwind Cloak, which can be purchased after completing the quest Wind and Sand, which is given by Neloth if you ask him to help enough. Next up is Alteration. Ash Rune and Ash Shell can be purchased upon completion of the From the Ashes quest. The spell tome for Candlelight can be found in Fort Snowhawk or purchased from the merchants on screen. Detect Dead can be found in Apocrypha in the Black Book Sallow Regent by heading down the left corridor at the start of the area. Detect Life is given to the player as a reward for the quest Infiltration, which is the quest that takes you into Trave's Watch. Dragonhide is rewarded to the player for completing the Master Alteration quest. Next is Ebony Flesh, which can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next up is Equilibrium, which can only be found at the start of Labyrinthian, down the pathways a little after the Skeletal Dragon. Iron Flesh can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Mage Light can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Mass Paralysis can only be purchased after completing the Master Alteration quest. Master Transmute can be found once you have the quest Fortunate Son. It will then be available in a safe in Elsaf's room in the Warrens in Markarth. Oak Flesh can be found after using the Sapphire Dragonclaw in Shroud Hearth Barrow or purchased from the merchants on screen. Once again, we are off to Hobbs Fall Cave for Paralysis Rune. In the chest at the end, yada yada, you get it by now. Paralyze can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next is Stone Flesh, which can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next is Telekinesis. The easiest way to get this is to go to Redwater Den, drink the skooma, and wake up right next to the spell tome. But it can also be found in Ben Congarek, in Solstheim, or purchased from one of the merchants on screen. Next is Telekinesis Arrows, which can be found in the Arcanium. Now we have all of the teleport pet spells, but you just get them when you get the pets, so moving on. Next is Transmute, which can be found either at the end of Halted Scream Camp or at the second area of Anselrond, but honestly, just go to the camp, it's a million times easier. And finally, for Alteration, we have Water Breathing, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. And finally, we have Restoration. First up, we have Bane of the Undead, which is rewarded to the player for completing the Master Restoration quest. Next is Circle of Protection, which can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Close Wounds can be earned by completing the Pilgrimage quest if your restoration is at least 40, except sometimes it's a different spell and sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes it's a bunch of spells, but we'll get there. Next up is Fast Healing, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Grand Healing can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Next is Greater Ward, which It's another one of those, oh, you might get it from the Pilgrimage quest if you have 40 restoration spells. Guardian Circle can be purchased after the completion of the Master Restoration quest. Next up is Heal Other, which is yet another of the you might get it from the Pilgrimage quest if you have 40 restoration spells, but you also get it during Shalador's Maze. Heal Undead can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Just remember to be on good terms with the Volkihar before you try that one. Next up is Healing, which of course all players start with. Next is a Healing Hands, which can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Next is Lesser Ward, which can be found in Offhand, but who cares when Toftir will literally just give it to you for free as part of the first college quest. Necromantic Healing can be found in Dim Hollow Crypt, just before the entrance to the boss room with the word wall in it. Next up is Poison Rune, which can be purchased from the Ashes quest. Wait, why is this a restoration spell? Repel Lesser Undead is another possible quest reward from the Pilgrimage if your restoration is at least 40. Repel Undead can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Steadfast Ward can be found fairly deep into Labyrinthian, but luckily is quite hard to miss. Then again, ward spells kinda suck, so maybe you should miss it. Stendar's Aura can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Stendar's Aura is actually fairly interesting because it acts as a light source, meaning when you're in Apocrypha in those dark zones, if you use it, you won't get hurt, which is nice. Sunfire can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Turn Greater Undead can be purchased from the merchant on screen. Turn Lesser Undead can be purchased from the merchants on screen. Turn Undead is the last of the reward spells for the Pilgrimage quest. It can also be obtained by talking with Styr during the Wolf Queen Awakened quest. And our final spell, Vampire's Bane, can be purchased from the merchant on screen. And that's it. Every spell in the game. Wow, that took longer than I thought it would. If you'd like me to do the same for the shouts or powers or anything else, then leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And I will see you in the next one.